Taylor McHargue, ESPN, CBS broadcaster, analyst, and also former Rice quarterback, joins us. Love it, the segment with him on Thursdays at around 4:30. Taylor, since the last time we spoke with you on the eve of all hell breaking loose, the Big 12 has gained 4 more teams in 1 year.
It feels like if you let more than a day go by, then something else changes. Look, I think this is not an original thought, right? A lot of people have said the same thing, but I'm in agreement with what a remarkable job the Big 12 has done, where if you look back when Texas and Oklahoma, made their announcement that they were leaving the Big 12, this was the conference that everybody expected to sort of dissolve, where the expectation was the ACC, the Big 10, the Pac-12, they were going to start to poach teams and the Big 12 would just be no more. In reality, it's really become the Pac-12 that appears to be no more. And the Big 12, from a competitive standpoint, it's now right there, in my opinion. We talked about this last week. It's right there with the ACC. And from an entertainment standpoint, man, we've got some really fun matchups that are going to come from this conference now. I think it makes a lot of sense in some respects, especially for Arizona and Arizona State. The downside to this, obviously, is just how upsetting it is for the Pac-12. And we talked a lot about that last week. But, man, you just have to feel for these fan bases, especially like a Washington State and Oregon State, where there's a lot of rich history there. They've been playing football against these Pac-12 teams and have these regional rivalries that they're going away. I think you saw the reaction across college football from fans everywhere, even from Big Ten teams and SEC teams that are positively impacted by the conference realignment. They were still saying, look, I don't think anybody really loves the trajectory of where we're going with realignment right now.
Taylor, can you imagine a world where Cal and Stanford and Rice are all in the same league?
Rice is a little bit of an outlier because, I know your listeners probably don't want us to spend too much time talking about Rice football, but the new president at Rice has taken a stance similar to what the new chancellor at Vanderbilt come out and said, where they want to be better at football and specifically the revenue sports, football, basketball, and baseball, where Rice has not been good for a while. So I could see a world where Rice is trying to position themselves if there's another round of realignment down the line. All that to say, it was a big step up for Rice to get out of Conference USA and get into the American. And I know they're excited about the opportunity in the American Conference. Stanford, to me, I think it would make a lot of sense if they went independent, a la a Notre Dame. I think they could absolutely pull it off. Cal is the one, to me, that, it just feels like, are they asleep at the wheel? You really haven't seen until one statement that came out that they're trying to be forward facing and they want to be out ahead of this, but I don't know that we've seen anything that really leads you to believe that. Would there be some alignment where you pull in, and I'm going to grab San Diego State as well, if you grab those teams and consolidated them into the American Conference? I think there certainly would be some synergy there, but is that exciting for Cal and Stanford? I mean, that's a clear step down in competition from what they've been playing against for, 100 years. So I think all paths right now look pretty bleak if you're the remaining 4 that are in the Pac-12, and it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
As just a college football fan, I mean, not really discussing the discussions because that's a part of any fandom really, but just as a college football fan and seeing what's going on, do you like it? Are you intrigued by it, or do you kind of hate that there is tradition, rivalries, whatever being thrown to the side?
Yeah, I think it's both. I think we had our college football seminar earlier this week with CBS Sports, and there are things that are being called out with the Big Ten and matchups that it gets you really excited when you start to think about, Oregon in a regular season playing against Michigan. I mean, I think there's a lot there that you should be excited about if you're a college football fan. And frankly, that's what these conferences are betting on, is people will tune into these mega matchups that we usually only get in September if they play each other out of conference or if they play each other in a bowl game. But I think what you also are seeing on the other side of the coin is these regional rivalries. That's part of what makes college football so great, right? I mean, that's where, take it back to the Big 12, losing Bedlam, Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, that not being a conference matchup just feels so silly. And it's the same thing for Texas and A&M for the last decade. Why have those two teams not been playing one another? And why in this new look SEC are they not? I don't know if it's been determined yet, but the last I saw, that's not guaranteed that those two play one another. So from that perspective, I think people are really frustrated with the losing those regional rivalries. But you got to be really excited about some of these marquee matchups that we're going to get year in and year out.
Taylor, when you look at the ACC and the madness that's happening there right now, what do you think is the future for that league?
That conference, to me, is what you saw the last couple of days, where they're in discussions with a couple of teams from the Pac-12, also SMU, who very clearly coming across almost, you could say, a little bit desperate, where they're trying to get their name in the hat and they're foregoing distributions to get into a Power 5 conference. I think the ACC would be wise, and it looks like this is what they're doing. I would be in agreement and think there's wisdom in if they just sat tight for right now. I think that is still a very strong conference, especially if you can retain Florida State and Clemson. That's going to be obviously the deciding factor with the ACC. If you can retain those two, those are your national championship quality programs that you really have to have if you want to keep your status as one of the top 3 or 4 conferences in the country. It'll be interesting to see what do they do with UConn. Is that a team that, from a basketball perspective, do you go out and try and get a UConn? From football, it doesn't really add much historically. Maybe that changes if they get into the ACC. I would say probably not, at least not in the short term. But I see in these last few days before realignment will get paused until next year. If I'm the ACC, I just sit tight. I don't think it makes a ton of sense to grab a couple of the West Coast teams just because the travel, it would be different. You're talking about a Washington and Oregon. Those are bigger brands. How much do you really gain from Stanford and especially Cal?
Taylor, as far as on the field, where the games are played, I mean, because we've all been doing this, though, but I think we're all itching now knowing that it's right around the corner. Camps have started up. What have been a couple of your focuses, whether it be, a particular set of players or a player or a group of just kind of where has your interest level been in trying to wonder and figure out, some things that might occur this season?
I don't want to sound like too much of a homer because I live here in Austin, but I've been really intrigued by the lack of Texas gets a lot of attention every year, but Quinn Ewers not being really in any of the preseason discussions for dark horse Heisman. I think that yesterday was the first time that I saw Vegas came out. Texas is one of their top 5 teams from an odds perspective to make the college football playoff, just with where their schedule lines up. And to me, when you look at the national headlines, specifically at the quarterback position, Quinn Ewers not really, it doesn't line up to me on where his ceiling could be. And make no mistake about it, if they go into Tuscaloosa and win that game and he plays well, he's at the forefront of the Heisman conversation.
Sure.
He's going to be right there. But it doesn't feel like we're ready to have that conversation. And I honestly think it's because we've been so burned by Texas for the last 10 years that you build up this hype train and then they fall on their face. And they've got one 10-win season in the last decade. And I think that's led people to be gun shy, where they don't want to over promise and then Texas under delivers again. But that is a deep bench. That roster, I know they lost Bijan Robinson, but basically everywhere else on that team, they've gotten better. Wide receiver room's probably the best that it's been since 2009. Offensive line, certainly the most depth that they've had since 2009. And you've got a quarterback that when he was playing well and healthy last year, they likely win that game against Alabama if he stays in the game. And I just don't think there's enough attention specific to the quarterback position right now for Texas and Quinn Ewers.
Taylor, as these workouts are going on, and they started, about a week, almost 2 weeks ago, as these workouts are going on and you have quarterbacks, receivers, you hear about installing the offense. How much of that actually goes on in August prior to when the season begins?
Yeah, so you do it twice. Once in spring ball, and spring ball is where you're really focusing on you. You're going in, and it's just purely, at least for the first 3 weeks out of the 4 weeks, you're not scheming your defense. You're trying to make sure that you've got the nuts and bolts of your offense down. And then you do the same thing in fall camp. And that's where you come in and you're starting from the ground up. On the offensive side of the ball, you're going through your base protections, base run game, quick game, downfield passing game. And from there, as the season goes on, offenses they expand on a week-to-week basis based on who you're playing, and it's individual tags. So you build off of those base plays and those base schemes where you might have a handful of plays that on a week-to-week basis you just don't carry anymore depending on who you're playing. But you don't worry about that until you get into the season. The first 3 weeks of camp, certainly the first 2 weeks of camp, you're focused on you. You're making sure offensive and defensive side of the ball, you know how to do exactly what your fundamentals are. Whatever those building blocks of your offense and defense, you got to make sure you have those down before you get into any sort of scheming. Our rule, we really didn't start to look at who we were playing and really study tape on them until 2 weeks into fall camp. Those first 2 weeks, it's all about you.
Taylor, what's your Greg?
You're obviously a guy who's got a great knowledge of the American Athletic Conference. They're seeing an influx of new teams, including, of course, your school there in Rice, but UTSA, North Texas, FAU, Charlotte, UAB. How excited are you for this league, and just kind of what pops out to you? I mean, we're obviously big Jeff Traylor fans over here and love what he does with the Roadrunners, but just what are your thoughts behind the new look coming into this season?
Yeah, I think the American, as best they could, did a great job replacing. Those are solid programs, obviously, in U of H, Cincinnati, and Central Florida that left. But you added a few programs that right away are going to compete, and one specifically in UTSA that will compete at the highest level of that conference. I said earlier this week, I think they go on the road. I think they beat Houston. And I think by the end of September, depending on how they go play at Tennessee, UTSA likely is ranked by the end of the month. I think they're that talented. They've got that much depth coming back. I think one of the things people don't realize right now is just how interesting some of the head coaches are in that conference. Trent Dilfer takes over at UAB. I think there's a lot of eyeballs, at least from a regional perspective, on what does he look like? What does his program look like as a first-time college head coach? Tom Herman now at FAU. I think that's been pretty quiet. I think it's really gone under the radar that he's now in Boca Raton. And if you look at everywhere he's been prior to when he kind of flamed out at the end of his tenure at Texas, he recruited well and they won ball games. He was an excellent play caller at Iowa State. He did great things at Ohio State, Houston, obviously. And I expect the same thing at FAU. He's going to be able to recruit. So there's other storylines in that conference that are interesting. And then, for Rice, JT Daniels, fourth school. He'll be the first quarterback to ever start 3 different games against one team with 3 different teams. So he's playing Texas opening this year, played them at West Virginia and at USC. There's a lot of other storylines that we could get into, but I think the conference, again, as best they possibly could, the 6 teams that they added, I think the American did a great job.
Taylor, great stuff. Thank you very much for your time. Taylor McHargue with us, former Rice quarterback and broadcast analyst with us on 365 Sports. Around the corner, Craig Smoak and Off the Radar.